The smell of disinfectant with a hint of lavender filled my lungs, an expensive, sterile aroma that promised peace, but delivered only loneliness. Outside my floor-to-ceiling window, the Pacific Ocean stretched out like an infinite blue carpet, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding in my room at Serenity Gardens. My son, Ricardo, sat before me, the personification of the success I had helped build. His Italian suit, an impeccable gray, didn't have a single crease, and his smile, white and perfectly aligned, didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, blue and cold, like the sea outside on a winter day, belonged to a stranger. Beside him, an equally polished-looking man held a leather briefcase. Ricardo didn't come to visit me. He came to do business. With the haste of someone who has a flight to catch, he began a rehearsed speech about organizing finances and avoiding future problems. Empty words that echoed in the oppressive silence of the room. He slid the papers across the glass table, the cold surface reflecting his impatient expression. It was my final will. My fingers, gnarled by arthritis and by years of kneading the dough for the tamales that financed his education, trembled when he handed me a gold pen. "Just sign here, Mom. For your own good," he said, and his finger pointed to the dotted line. In that instant, the veil was torn. There was no love, no care, only a voracious greed, a calculated wait for my death. He didn't see his mother, but a final obstacle. Between him and the fortune my late husband and I had built with sweat and cornflour, the air grew thin. Every beat of my heart felt like a hammer against my ribs. Humiliation was a slow poison, burning in my veins. I was reduced to a signature, a final bureaucratic act to make his life easier. I looked at the photo of my 6-year-old Ricardo, which I kept on the nightstand. Where was that boy? What did I do wrong? The pain was so overwhelming, so deep, that for a moment I thought my heart would finally give out. But then, something different happened. Beneath the avalanche of sadness, a spark of steel ignited. The steel forged in decades of work, of sacrifice, of silent resilience. He was waiting for my death, but in that very moment, looking at the man my son had become, I decided that I would begin to live, and my legacy would not be the reward for his cruelty. If you love Jesus and believe my story has something to teach you, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation. I ask that you join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. The sound of the door closing was soft, an almost imperceptible click, designed not to disturb the expensive peace of Serenity Gardens. But to me, it sounded like the bang of an auctioneer's gavel, sealing my fate as a discarded object. Ricardo didn't even look back. His Italian shoes barely made a sound on the virgin wool carpet that covered the hallway, taking him away from me, back to his world of numbers, contracts, and ambition, a world where I was no longer needed, except as an asset to be liquidated. I remained paralyzed in the designer armchair, which was elegant to look at, but uncomfortable for a 78-year-old body. The California sun streamed through the window, a golden rectangle on the floor, illuminating the dust that danced in the air. Insignificant particles, just like I felt. The papers he left, my unsigned will, seemed to mock me on the glass table. They were the physical proof that the love I had dedicated my entire life to had turned into a cold transaction. I looked around the room, which felt more like a luxury hotel suite than a home. The walls, painted a neutral and insipid shade of beige, were adorned with abstract prints chosen by a decorator. There was nothing of me there. No photo of my late husband. No souvenirs from our travels. None of my crocheted doilies. Ricardo said those things were old and depressing, and that I needed a clean and modern environment to have positive thoughts. Now I understood. He didn't just want to remove me from his life. He wanted to erase the life that existed before him, the life that created him. The silence was my constant companion, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower in the perfectly manicured gardens, or the soft shuffle of other lonely souls' shoes in the hallway. In that moment, the loneliness was so palpable, I could feel it like a weight on. my chest, pushing me deeper into the armchair, making it hard to even breathe. With an effort that seemed monumental, I forced my stiffened limbs to move. I needed air. I needed to escape that room that had become a golden tomb. Walking down the hallway of Serenity Gardens was like floating through a museum of forgotten lives. Other residents passed me, their faces masks of empty politeness, their eyes reflecting the same resignation I felt in my heart. We exchanged silent nods, a mute acknowledgement of our shared exile. It was then that Mrs. Albright, the facility's administrator, intercepted me near the grand lobby. Her smile was a masterpiece of falsehood, perfectly white and utterly devoid of warmth. "Elena, dear," she said, her voice like artificial honey. "Your son just left. Ricardo is such a thoughtful man, isn't he? He keeps us updated on everything, ensuring you have the best care. He mentioned you were finalizing some important documents for your future. You're so lucky to have a son who takes care of everything so diligently." Every word was a stab. She spoke loudly enough for the lady sitting on the nearby sofa to hear. I felt my face burn. To the world, to everyone in that place, I was the elderly, incapable mother, and Ricardo was the model son, the pillar of devotion. No one saw the truth. No one saw that his diligence was that of a vulture circling its prey. I was a prisoner of his public image. The humiliation left me speechless. I just nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, feeling the weight of my silence, of my helplessness. She gave my arm a condescending pat, as if I were a child, and continued on her way, leaving me there, exposed and invisible at the same time, in the middle of the impeccable hallway. I retreated to the gardens, the only place where the air didn't seem recycled and nature offered a silent solace. The roses were perfect, the lavender beds buzzed with bees, and the grass was an emerald green carpet. Everything was impeccably maintained, a fabricated beauty that on that day seemed profoundly sad to me. I sat on a wrought iron bench in the shade of a magnolia tree, and finally let the tremor take over my hands. From my pocket, I took out the small, worn photograph that was my only treasure. Ricardo, at 6 years old, smiling at the camera, a baby tooth missing, his eyes full of a light that had long since been extinguished. I kissed the worn image, and a single tear, hot and salty, rolled down my wrinkled face and fell onto the paper. Who was that man who visited me? What had turned my boy into that cold-eyed predator? Guilt gnawed at me. Had I loved him too much? Had I given him everything so easily that he never learned the value of anything, especially a mother's heart? The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a painful beauty that I couldn't appreciate. I felt the emptiness take hold of me, a chasm so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. In that moment, I was just that, an old woman waiting for the end, in a perfectly manicured garden, having failed in her only mission, that of raising a good man. I wondered if the woman who raised a son with so much love still existed within me. But what I didn't know was that, in that very garden, the answer was about to arrive in the most unexpected way. Memories come in flashes, with the scent of corn and cilantro. I remember our first restaurant in Fresno, a small shop with only 4 tables that my late husband, Miguel, and I opened with a lifetime of savings. Our hands always smelled of onions and our backs ached, but our hearts were full. Ricardo was born in the midst of this battle. He was our little king, the reason for every sacrifice. The nights we spent awake, not because of his crying, but to prepare the tamale dough for the next day, were for his future. We wanted him to have everything we didn't: a prestigious education, clothes without patches, a life without the dust and exhaustion we knew. Every dollar we earned was invested in him. And he was a sweet boy who loved the taste of his mother's food and his father's hug. The restaurant grew, became a franchise, but our essence was the same. We were the Martinez family, who built a small empire based on recipes passed down through generations. The change began slowly, like a frost that gradually kills the plants. When Ricardo went to business school, the pride I felt was immense. But he came home different. Each holiday, he brought friends who looked at our house with curiosity, as if it were a museum piece. He began to correct my English accent, to ask me not to hug him in front of others. After Miguel's death, the abyss between us deepened. I clung to Ricardo, my only son, but he seemed to pull away, irritated by my grief, by my neediness. He took over the business, but with a different mindset. To him, the family legacy was not about the food or the community. It was about profit margins and expansion. The warmth of our kitchen was replaced by the coldness of a boardroom. The food that united us became just a product, and I, a relic of a time he wanted to forget. The first public humiliation that truly scarred me happened on a Thanksgiving day. Ricardo brought home his fiancée, a slender, blonde woman who seemed to be afraid of carbohydrates. I spent 2 days cooking all his favorite dishes, filling the house with the aromas of his childhood. When we sat down to dinner, she made a face at the mole. Ricardo, wanting to impress her, laughed and said, "Mom, we need to modernize these recipes. Nobody eats this heavy food anymore." He said it in front of me, at my table, devaluing the food that paid for his education and was the soul of our family. He made me feel like an outdated cook, an embarrassment. I smiled, swallowed the pain along with the food, but something inside me broke. That day, I realized that to fit into my son's new world, I would have to shrink until I became invisible. The second time was crueler. Ricardo was already a successful real estate developer and was obsessed with the idea of making me sell the house where he grew up, the house I built with Miguel. One day, he showed up with one of his partners without telling me. As I was serving them coffee, I heard Ricardo say to the man, as if I weren't in the room, "The house has great bones, but of course, it needs a total gut renovation. It's too much for my mother to handle alone. At this age, a big place like this is just a burden, a responsibility she can no longer manage." He called me a burden in my own home. He wasn't talking about the property. He was talking about me. I was the obstacle, the old furniture that needed to be removed so the place could be sold. The partner looked at me with pity, and that look was almost worse than Ricardo's words. I felt small, incompetent, a piece of antique furniture waiting to be discarded. The pressure to move me into Serenity Gardens was the final blow. He used every weapon, my loneliness, my fear of falling and having no one to help, guilt. He showed me glossy brochures of the nursing home, describing it as a 5-star resort, a paradise where I would be treated like a queen. "You deserve this, Mom," he would say, his voice sounding dangerously sincere. "After a lifetime of work, you deserve to be pampered." It was a brilliant manipulation. He wasn't abandoning me. He was promoting me to a life of luxury. To resist seemed like an act of ingratitude. I fought as long as I could, clinging to the walls that held Miguel's laughter and Ricardo's first steps. But my strength was waning, eroded by the pain of grief and the relentless campaign of my own son. Tired of being a burden, I gave in. The day of the move was a blur of boxes and silent tears. Ricardo hired a company that packed up my life in less than 6 hours. I watched my pots and pans, my photo albums, the swing Miguel built, all being taken to a storage unit. He only allowed me to take one small box of personal items. In that box, I placed the photo of my smiling boy. As I took one last look at my house, now empty and silent, I felt that my life was officially over. I moved into that golden prison believing I had lost everything. I thought my story had ended there, like a dying ember. Little did I know that a simple soul, carrying the scent of corn and kindness, was about to blow on that ember and reignite a fire. I was sitting on that garden bench, drowning in my own misery, when a gentle shadow fell over me. It was Isabella, one of the younger caregivers, a girl from Mexico whose smile seemed to carry the sun of her homeland. She said nothing about the tears on my face. She simply handed me a glass of water and a small package wrapped in a corn husk. "My grandmother says that a homemade tamale can cure almost anything," she said softly. Hesitantly, I took the offering. The warmth passed through the husk and warmed my cold hands. As I unwrapped it, the familiar smell of corn dough and seasoned meat rose to me, and it was as if decades of pain and loneliness dissolved for an instant. I took a bite, and the flavor transported me back to my kitchen, to Miguel's arms, to a time when love was the main ingredient. Isabella saw the photo I was holding. "He looks like you," she said simply. That gesture, that food, that simple and selfless human connection was like a lightning bolt in my darkness. In that moment, the truth became crystal clear. I had spent my entire life pouring my love and my fortune into a bottomless pit, a son who saw my sacrifices as his due. Meanwhile, a stranger, who earned a minimum wage to care for forgotten elderly people, offered me a piece of her own lunch, an act of pure generosity. The pain in my chest didn't disappear, but it transformed. The fire of sorrow became the steel of resolve. I straightened my back on that bench, no longer bent by the weight of disappointment, but lifted by a new purpose. The legacy of Miguel and Elena Martinez would not be used to finance luxury apartments and imported cars for a man with an empty heart. Our heritage, built with calloused hands and love in our souls, would go where true value resided: in kindness, in opportunity, in people like Isabella, who understood that the richness of a life is not in what one accumulates, but in what one shares. The frail, weeping widow died in that garden. In her place, a matriarch with a final mission was born. The next morning, I asked for Isabella's help, not with tears, but with a clarity that surprised her. I asked her to use her day off to find me a lawyer, a public defender, someone who did not belong to Ricardo's expensive and corrupt world. With her help, I made the call. My voice on the phone was firm, the voice of the woman who once commanded the kitchen of a successful restaurant. In a few days, secretly, in my room, I rewrote my destiny and the destiny of my family's fortune. With the new will secured, I called Ricardo. I kept my voice neutral, almost submissive. "Son, can you come tomorrow? I've thought about it. You're right. It's time to sign the papers and get everything in order." I heard the relief and poorly disguised triumph in his voice as he agreed. He couldn't imagine that the frail woman he planned to dispossess had prepared one final lesson, and that lesson would be the most expensive of his life. "We would like to feel your presence in this very moment. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now." By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Each comment is a point of light in our healing process. Ricardo arrived the next day, punctually. The smile on his face was that of a man who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He entered my room without knocking, already reaching out to grab the papers he expected to find. "So, Mom, let's get this over with," he said, impatience leaking through his facade of a caring son. I remained seated, straighter than he had seen me in years. Instead of the pile of documents, I handed him a single white envelope. His eyes narrowed in confusion. "What is this?" he asked. "My real will," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "The one I wrote this week, the one that reflects my true values, not your ambitions." His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. He tore the envelope with restrained violence. His eyes scanned the document, quickly at first, then more slowly, reading each word as if it were written in a foreign language. I saw the color drain from his face, replaced by a sickly pallor, and then by the red of pure fury. "This is a joke," he hissed, crumpling the paper in his hand. "You're senile. That maid? That immigrant? She manipulated you," he shouted, his voice finally revealing the monster hiding beneath the expensive suit. "I gave you a lifetime of luxury, Ricardo," I said calmly, looking him in the eye. "But I forgot to teach you the value of things that have no price. This fortune, built with your father's sweat and mine, will now teach that to others." His mask fell completely, and for the first time, I saw my son exactly as he was, weak, terrified, and rotten to the core. Ricardo's threats to sue me, to have me declared incompetent, proved to be empty. The lawyer I hired, a man of integrity who fought for community causes, had ensured my decision was ironclad. Ricardo discovered that the fortune he had been using as collateral for his risky investments would no longer exist. In a matter of months, his financial house of cards began to crumble. Without the cushion of my money, his creditors came calling. He had to sell his luxury car, then the apartment with the ocean view. His downfall was not caused by an act of revenge on my part, but by the weight of his own greed. He didn't lose his mother's money. He lost the money that was never truly his. While Ricardo's world collapsed, mine flourished. Serenity Gardens ceased to be my prison and became my home, my kingdom. I began to use my own funds to promote small changes. I organized movie nights in the common room, with old Mexican films that made the other Latino residents cry with nostalgia. With Isabella's help, I transformed a part of the sterile kitchen into a space where, once a week, we cooked homemade dishes for everyone. The smell of fresh bread and slow-cooked stews began to replace the scent of disinfectant. The residents, once silent ghosts, began to talk, to laugh, to share stories. I was no longer the poor, abandoned old lady. I was Doña Elena, the matriarch of the unlikely family we had built. The high point of my new life was the creation of the La Herencia del Corazón Foundation, the Heritage of the Heart Foundation. From my room, with the help of my new lawyer, I directed my estate to create an educational fund for the children of low-income immigrants in California. The first full scholarship, of course, was awarded to Isabella's 2 children, ensuring they would have the opportunity their parents never had. I received a thank you letter written in the careful handwriting of her eldest son. That simple sheet of paper, filled with sincere gratitude, was worth more to me than all the checks Ricardo had ever signed. My legacy would not be of concrete and steel, but of bright futures and grateful hearts. Looking out my window now, I see the same Pacific Ocean, but it no longer seems cold and indifferent. It seems vast and full of possibilities, like the life I have rediscovered. Ricardo tried to reduce me to a signature on a piece of paper, to an obstacle to be removed. He didn't realize that in trying to erase me, he only gave me the clarity to rewrite myself. He took a house from me, but he gave me back myself. Today, I do not possess the wealth he coveted, but I have something his money can never buy: peace. And that inheritance is mine alone.